It was the last period of the day, and the classroom was a ticking time bomb, the tension crackling in the air. Mrs. Albright, the mathematics instructor, dropped a heavy textbook on her desk with a thud, her gaze fixed on the back of the classroom. "Emily, solve this equation." The class fell into a hushed silence, though a wave of curiosity rippled through the students. Every eye in the room shifted to Emily, the reserved girl who sat by herself in the corner. She never put her hand up to answer questions, seemed entirely indifferent to her schoolwork, and never joined in on the daily chatter. Most of her classmates had dismissed her as just another disengaged teenager, content to remain in the shadows. Today, however, there was a different quality to Mrs. Albright's tone. It wasn't just a request, it was a public dare. The problem displayed on the board was a nightmarish web of symbols and figures, an equation that even the most gifted students had steered clear of. It was widely considered impossible to solve in less than 15 minutes. Emily showed no reaction. Her wide, calm eyes scanned the problem for just a moment before she let out a faint sigh and rose from her seat. "Are you certain?" she asked, her voice so soft it was barely audible across the room. Yet, it was enough to make Mrs. Albright pause, a smug smile forming on her lips. The entire class seemed to hold its breath, sensing something significant was about to unfold. "How can you not see it?" Mrs. Albright's voice suddenly screeched, her face contorting in disbelief as the classroom erupted into chaos. Emily stood frozen at the board, her chalk poised over the final line of the intricate equation. She could feel the intense pressure of every student's stare, hear every whisper, and sense the teacher's burning frustration right behind her. How had the situation escalated so dramatically? Was she on the verge of revealing a part of herself that no one could possibly comprehend, or was she about to shatter in front of everyone, collapsing under the pressure of a challenge nobody expected her to even attempt? Emily had always been invisible, or at least that's what she had made herself believe. The shy girl who never spoke, never sought attention, and always kept her head down. School was a monotonous cycle of lectures and exams, utterly unremarkable. She held no grand dreams or lofty ambitions, only a deep-seated desire to fly under the radar and simply get through it. But beneath the surface, something about her was profoundly different. Her mind operated in ways no one around her could understand, least of all her teachers, who had labeled her a lazy, borderline passing student who was too quiet to be bothered. It wasn't laziness, it was fear. A fear of being too different, a fear of being exposed for who she really was. A genius. Because the last time anyone had truly acknowledged her abilities, it had destroyed everything. Her mother had been ecstatic, her father had been unnerved, and her peers had been outright scared. She had discovered at a young age that her intellect could be an intimidating and isolating trait. Consequently, she made a conscious decision to conceal it. When Mrs. Albright challenged her to solve the equation, it wasn't a completely random act. For several weeks, Emily had been hearing the whispers. Whispers about her supposed laziness, her lack of effort, and how she managed to just skim by had been circulating for weeks. She had tried to ignore the sneers, the dismissive eye rolls, and the condescending glances, but it had all been building to this point. Now, Mrs. Albright was pushing her, cornering her in front of everyone. This wasn't just a question, it was a public mockery, a test designed to make her fail. Emily's hands trembled as she stood before the board, but her mind sharpened into a state of intense focus. Nobody in that room expected her to finish the equation in time. They never did. They all saw her as just like them, another average student. But this time, she refused to let them dictate the narrative. "Go on, Emily," Mrs. Albright taunted from her desk, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let's finally see if you're as brilliant as some people seem to think." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the pressure in the classroom intensify. Her classmates stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief and morbid curiosity, all of them waiting for her to stumble and confirm what they secretly believed. But Emily was already past the point of caring about their expectations. With movements that were both swift and fluid, she began to write out the solution on the board. Her mind was a tempest of numbers and patterns, each step flowing logically into the next, more intricate than the last. The classroom was completely silent, the only sound being the scratching of her chalk as she neared the final answer. Mrs. Albright's voice, sharp and accusatory, cut through the quiet. "You honestly think you can solve that?" she snapped, her tone full of scorn. Emily hesitated for only a fraction of a second before writing down the final flawless answer. A long, pregnant silence filled the room. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then, Mrs. Albright let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You actually believe that is correct?" she scoffed. "This is a university-level problem. You couldn't possibly—" Emily turned around to face her teacher directly. "Check it," she said calmly. "It's correct." For the first time, Mrs. Albright's smug smile faltered. She stepped forward, her eyes frantically scanning the complex series of steps on the board. The room was utterly still as the entire class held its breath. A wave of shock washed over Mrs. Albright's face, too obvious for her to conceal. She looked from the board back to Emily, her voice now strained and far less confident than before. I need to check this," she stammered. As Mrs. Albright pulled out her phone and began frantically typing the equation into a calculator app, Emily was hit with a rush of conflicting emotions. The weight of their collective gaze felt suffocating. Was this the moment she would finally be exposed? Or was it the moment everything would change forever? What would they think of her now? Could they possibly understand the truth about her? The silence lingered for far too long. Finally, Mrs. Albright's strained voice cut through the thick tension. "This is impossible." Emily's stomach plummeted. It wasn't just the math problem that was impossible, it was the entire situation, everything that would come with this sudden revelation. She had done it. She had completely shattered the facade of normalcy she had painstakingly built and maintained for years. Her classmates were now staring at her, their faces a canvas of awe mixed with a hint of fear. They had no idea what to make of her, and in that moment, neither did she. Emily turned away from Mrs. Albright as the room began to buzz with hushed voices. Her classmates were whispering and pointing, desperately trying to process the scene they had just witnessed. But Emily wasn't finished. She refused to just stand there and allow them to walk away with their own assumptions. "I want to say something," Emily announced, her voice steady and loud enough to command the attention of the entire room. "I've been hiding in plain sight for my entire life, but I am not going to hide anymore. I am not just another student, I am not your joke, and I am not here to make any of you feel comfortable. I am who I am." An immediate, stunned silence fell over the classroom. The bell rang, its sharp sound signaling the end of the school day, but Emily didn't move right away. She stood in the hallway for a moment, her fingers gripping the straps of her backpack tightly as her mind raced. There was a strange lightness in her chest, a combination of profound relief and something else she hadn't let herself feel in years. Pride. As she walked toward the school exit, she could still hear the murmur of conversation behind her, muffled voices attempting to make sense of what happened. "Did you see that? She solved it perfectly. Is she some kind of genius or something? I never knew she was that smart. All this time we just thought she was quiet, but wow." Her heart swelled with a sense of validation she hadn't even realized she had been craving. The world was no longer looking at her as the girl who faded into the background. She was no longer invisible. She was Emily, the girl who could achieve the impossible. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for this exact moment, she saw him. It was Jake, the guy who had been in her math class since freshman year. Always joking, always charming, but never taking anything too seriously. He had always been pleasant to her, but it was clear he never really saw who she was. Now, however, something in the air had changed. His eyes met hers across the crowded courtyard, and instead of the usual dismissive glance, his expression had softened into something new. He took a few steps in her direction, his voice hesitant but sincere. You really are incredible, Emily," he said, the awe in his voice unmistakable. For a split second, Emily felt a weight she didn't know she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. She was being seen for the first time, not just as the quiet girl, but as someone capable of something extraordinary. "Thanks," she replied with a small, genuine smile. For once she didn't feel the need to shrink away or apologize for her abilities. She wasn't perfect, but she no longer had to hide who she was. Not anymore. As she left the school grounds, Emily knew something fundamental had shifted. There would be whispers, no doubt. There would also be expectations, endless questions, and maybe even some resistance. But the truth was, she was ready. She was no longer running from her own brilliance. Just as she reached the school gate, however, the sound of hurried footsteps behind her made her pause. She turned to see Mrs. Albright walking briskly in her direction, her posture still stiff, but now humbled. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment she would be punished, called out for upstaging her teacher in front of the entire class? But when Mrs. Albright stopped in front of her, she did not look angry or condescending. I owe you an apology," Mrs. Albright said quietly. "I underestimated you, and I should have known better." Her voice softened, a reluctant admiration creeping into her words. You have a gift, Emily, and I've been too blinded by my own ego to see it. Emily blinked, the shock of the moment rendering her speechless for a second. It's okay, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. I understand. I didn't expect you to see me. But Mrs. Albright shook her head firmly. I was wrong. You should not be hiding that brilliance, Emily. You shouldn't have to hide who you are. You should own it. And for the first time, Emily felt as if the walls that had surrounded her for so many years were finally, truly crumbling down. The world was opening up before her, and she was ready to walk into it with her head held high. With a final, appreciative nod, Emily turned toward the horizon, prepared for the next chapter of her life. As she walked away, she heard Mrs. Albright call after her, a new warmth in her voice. Good luck, Emily. You've earned it. Emily didn't look back as she stepped confidently into her future. What did you think of her story? Do you relate to the journey of breaking free from expectations and finally embracing your true self? Perhaps you've had a similar moment when the world finally recognized you for who you really are. If you've ever felt underestimated or like you were hiding your true potential, share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What is one lesson from Emily's story that you will take with you today? And if you want more stories that inspire, challenge, and make you think, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for our next video. You never know when your own Emily moment might be just around the corner.